gonna look at a military exhibit now. Here you can get a good look at some missiles. Hydra 2.75 rocket, a longbow Hellfire missile at the bottom there, developed by Lockheed Martin. There's a Lockheed Martin plant here in Alabama. Here's some more Stinger missiles there at the bottom. That's a very, very large missile down at the bottom. This is called an M26 rocket. And this is a Patriot missile here above it, which would be launched from one of these. This missile here is called the Bunker Buster. And this is a Javelin missile here. Here's some drones. This is a shuttle simulator. This tire was used on one of the space shuttles. It doesn't tell me which mission. This is pretty cool too. This is a mock-up from the International Space Station where they would get their water and stuff from, but it's a Coca-Cola machine. Astronauts could hook up their water pouches and get Coca-Cola. The Lockheed Martin 504C crew module demo flight cone. So this was developed by Lockheed Martin. These two large metal cylinders here on the outside would actually hold a propulsion system on it, like you see here. During flight, if there were any problems and something went wrong with the rocket, they could ignite those propulsion systems, which would launch this crew capsule far away from the rocket and get them to get the astronauts out of harm's way. This is the Lockheed Martin 504C crew module mock-up. This is what would sit on top of whatever rocket they would use. Partially for space camp, but for anybody else, they have several rides to simulate G-forces. Like, they call this the G-force accelerator. I will always call it the Gravitron. Look at the beauty of this Saturn V rocket. It's absolutely amazing. And they have a space shot. They're fixing to launch. These are a select variety of military missiles. Well, this is the U.S. Army Hawk. This is the U.S. Army Lance missile. This is a neat artifact here. This is a U.S. Army missile recovery submarine. It has bay doors here on the bottom, so if a missile was down in the water, they could open up the bay doors, lower the submarine right on top of it, and scoop it up. This mammoth rocket, which obviously probably did a lot of destruction, is the U.S. Army Nike Hercules. This is the U.S. Army Roland, which would shoot that Nike Hercules missile out of it. The U.S. Army Corporal missile. This is the U.S. Army Nike Zeus missile. This was the U.S. Army Little John rocket. This one was called Honest John. And then you get to the Spartan, which is this mammoth rocket that ultimately looks like it could wipe out an entire city. This was the Hermes rocket. The U.S. Army FAR, Forward Area Alerting Radar. So a mobile radar system. This is the U.S. Army Sergeant that they spent a lot of time building its trailer, so obviously it did some damage. And I know some people that have flown in this. It's awesome. This is the UH-1 Iroquois, a Healy. This was used during the Vietnam War. Absolutely amazing. This is the U.S. Army Chaparral. This is the U.S. Army Multiple Launch Rocket System, the MLRS. And the last one is a U.S. Army Humvee Avenger. This, however, is a new exhibit here they use this for astronauts to practice real life landing and other real life scenarios that pilots of the space shuttle may need. They also have this jet here. Looks like a lollipop or some kind of toy, where they have those poles braced into the engine compartments. NASA used these jets for different situations, especially if they needed to get astronauts for either Apollo or the space shuttle from one place to another, say Houston, Texas, at the NASA facility in Houston, get them down to the NASA facility in Cape Canaveral to get ready for launch. They would fly them in one of those jets because they could make it there in a hurry. When they launch a rocket into space, they have to be able to keep connection with it. The way they did that was an antenna. And here's the diagram right here behind me. This is an antenna, the antenna ring of a Saturn V rocket. You can see it's like an office building. It's so large. There's multiple men working inside of it, but it held all the communication components that was needed for that Saturn V to communicate with the space, with mission control in Cape Canaveral and mission control in Houston. And here's the real deal right here. This is a communication instrument ring from a Saturn V rocket. This is a gimbal, a steering unit. These are all the brains inside of the Saturn rocket. This is a memory gyro. This is Apollo's guidance computer here, along with their rotation arm that they would use to fly it, and their display and keyboard. This is the life aboard section. Medical kit, motion sickness, vacuum bags, meals, personal hygiene. Here's a fecal collection kit, how they would use the bathroom. This hook was used to pull the Apollo 13 craft out of the water. And these are all for once they're back. These are for seasickness, survival radio, beacons, water container, so they can survive if needed until crews can get there. Sunglasses and a blanket, a Gemini fuel cell, and the one right beside it, that's an Apollo fuel cell. This is a lunar sample container, so when they pick up moon rocks from Apollo, here's a lunar sample scoop, lunar sample shell core holder, lunar sample tongs, lunar dust brush, contingency soil sampler. And this is the mobile quarantine unit. This was actually used on all the Apollo missions. For the astronauts would have to stay on here for several days prior to launch so that they didn't catch any viruses or anything, and they would sleep in here and they would eat in here, watch TV or listen to the radio. This place had special air conditioning vents to purify the air, and they couldn't leave here until they went into the clean room and boarded their Apollo capsule. Here, this giant Saturn V rocket, which you can see is stainless steel, was used for wind tunnel testing. It was actually used by engineers while they were testing to see if it could withstand the pressures of going through space and the G-forces. So they put this in a wind tunnel, and this was the actual one they put in the wind tunnel to test. Just like I was saying, Americans right now are catching a ride on the Soyuz, which is this rocket here right now, for like $1 billion a seat, and it's usually 2 Russians and 1 American that launches every Soyuz. Here's the movie Space Camp. Of course, you should recognize Leah Thompson there. Leah Thompson. This is the rest of the cast. But all of these to the right, they're the students, while she was an actual astronaut, the one on the far left, and they wound up having to launch the space shuttle in order to keep from dying. All of these movies are movies that were filmed here in Huntsville. Space Warriors, A Smile as Big as the Moon, and the one I was talking about, Space Camp. Of course, Leah Thompson was really young then.